Good afternoon, Vivian.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for sharing this session.
Oh, thank you for your upcoming talk. I'm actually really interested in this topic, so I was excited to hear when Philip asked me to take part.
Right. Thank you. Well, I hope you will have a good session.
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Oh, a quick question about the questions and answers. Would you prefer people at the end, if they could do a combination, maybe some type into the chat the questions, some could ask them verbally. Is there something you prefer?
Yes, we could combine both. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'll suggest that at the end.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, and one more thing. Your last name is pronounced Adeshina, right? Or Sina?
Yes.
Shina. Okay.
Yeah. You pronounced it like a native.
Oh. I'm always trying.
It's good. Good afternoon, Prof.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Sir.
I see.
Nice to see you, sir.
Abiola Odejide. I think I know that name.
Good afternoon, ma. Yes, ma.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know whether you can hear me. Vivian, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I can.
Yeah.
Prof, can you hear me? You can hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, Prof. Yeah.
You're pretty loud, sir.
It's I think I didn't hear that. Am I loud enough? Okay. Oh, no.
Yes, you're loud.
Oh. Okay. Please, I would good. Okay, I'll just start. I hope you can hear me, but I'm not really as important as the speaker and the moderator. So I would like to welcome everyone to this lecture on abandoning properties, which is based on the Nigerian work. Thank you for joining us. We're using this program to launch our event for the year. Like you know, our speaker is Professor Additional, who is going to be introduced by the moderator. So my work here is just to hand over the event to the moderator. I hope you can hear me, Dr. Vivian Lu, who serves as an anthropologist, who did some research work in Nigeria with regards to the Igbo traders in Lagos, and then she also has interest in Africa-China relations, which is something that we share mutually. So I thank you, Dr. Lu, for accepting to help moderate this event, and so I'll hand over to you to help direct the session. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Philip, for hosting, and thank you everyone for being here. So again, my name is Vivian Lu. I'm an assistant professor of anthropology at Fordham University in New York City. And it's really my honor today to introduce our speaker for today's lecture, Professor Olutayo Charles Adesina, who is the current head Department of History in the Department of History at the University of Ibadan. Between 2015 and 18, he was director for the Center of General Studies at the University of Ibadan. Professor Adesina has carved a niche for himself as a scholar and as a historian. In 1994, he was a grantee of the United States Information Agency at Boston College in the United States. He was also invited by Professor Akim Mabogunje in 1998 as a distinguished scholar and geographer to a research associateship at the Development Policy Center in Ibadan. In 2008, he was a guest editor at the Journal of Global Initiatives at Kennesaw State University in Georgia, United States. And in 2009, he served as a member of the Committee of Experts at the Department of National Archives of Nigeria to the House of Representatives in Abuja. And this was for the public hearing on a bill for an act to repeal the National Archives Act of 1992 and to establish the National Archives and Records Administration. Between 2009 and 2011, he also served as a member of the Committee of Experts to set up the new Faculty of Arts, which is now the College of Liberal Studies of Bowen University in Osun State in Nigeria. And since 2008, he's been a resource person on the International Panel of Scholars, working with the American Council of Learned Societies in New York to assess applications for the African Humanities Program Fellowship. Professor Adesina is an esteemed fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Letters, which is a apex organization of humanistic scholars in Nigeria. He's been a recipient of numerous, several just visiting fellowship awards across places in the United States, the UK, and in New Delhi, India. He's also been a visiting professor at Kennesaw State University. And in 2019, Professor Adesina was a distinguished visiting guest lecturer at the Center for African Studies at Shanghai Normal University in China. So his many publications you can look up, and I really encourage you to if you've not read them already. And I guess we'll just get to it. The main talk that we have for today that we're all very much looking forward to is entitled Abandoned Properties, Reengaging a Post-Nigerian Civil War Narrative. And so now we'll hear from Professor Adesina and then this will be followed by a question and answer session afterwards. So I encourage you to remain engaged through the chat, and we will take questions both verbally and through the chat at the end. So please join me in welcoming Professor Adesina.
Thank you very much, Vivian. Can I share my screen?
Let's see. We have hosting. Philip, have you granted hosting abilities?
Yeah, I'll just do that right away.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh.
But you can continue for a while. Okay.
Okay. While he's busy checking the technology, I have to welcome all of you. I particularly welcome my teachers who are on the program today. Mama Emeritus Professor Odejide, Professor Akamu Adebayo, and Professor Toyin Falola. I thank you for being here with us today. And I thank each and every one of you for having the time to be with us today. Okay, yes, I can share now.
Yes, so, yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. I also thank the West African Transitional Justice for giving me the platform today. It is very important for us to engage this topic because it has remained extremely vibrant since the war ended in 1970. And today marks the 51st year that the war ended. And so I'm amazed that the topic has continued to generate so much interest across the country and beyond. Please mute your microphones if you are not talking, please. So this paper tries to recenter and mainstream the issue of abandoned properties as part of the national question and the call for sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Hello? 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 Okay. So okay, I now see. Okay, thank you very much. You can hear me, but I can't hear you. Thank you very much. The abandoned properties saga is one that has become very important in the debate on Nigeria's national question and the search for restructuring. And so the issue now has to do with the attempt to analyze an issue that has refused to go away. The case of abandoned properties in Port Harcourt especially, and rivers and cross rivers in general, has been caught up in ethnic politics, identities, and the search for social justice. And so a whole lot of agitations revolve around the questions surrounding this issue in Nigerian history, politics, and power relations. And so it is quite amazing to see the kind of passion that this has continued to evoke several years after the end of the Civil War. And I have said today is the 51st anniversary of signing the Art of Surrender by Biafra. But even then, 51 years after, the Civil War appears not to have ended. So the main question addressed by this work is how and when is closure likely to be on this issue? And so we have to also interrogate the Nigerian Civil War as an unfinished war. But the question is, if it is an unfinished war, who is angry? Who is aggrieved? And why should they be aggrieved? And this is very important in the light of what I'm going to show you.
Be here with you today to talk about a subject matter that is very close to our hearts, that's very personal to many of us, very sensitive matter, very painful matter indeed. And yet some of us have lived with some bitterness, and we make no apology about that. We were a people in war, led into war not by our own wishes or design, but in self-defense. No apologies to Nigeria, no apologies to the world. But here we are. I'm sorry, I'm going to stand up, if you don't mind. My name is Onyeka Onwenu, and it's not the Onyeka Onwenu that you think you know, that you read about in the paper. But the Onyeka Onwenu that was born and raised in Port Harcourt. That's correct. And the person who made that statement knows. When he says detail when he's telling you where this person came from. My father was the first arrondissement man in the Federal House, and he was representing the Port Harcourt constituency. He was the principal of Enitonia High School. He was a brilliant man, but he died too early. Thank you. That's my background. I'm also from Abia State. Since I am Adamazi, I'm Mwaro. Told him Adamazi. I'm from Imo State, Arundel, and I'm from Anambra, where my mother comes from. I can go there and live. I can do anything I want in Anambra. Nobody can say anything to me. I'm also from Lagos State. I'm surprised about it. Yeah, I'm from Lagos State. Married a Yoruba man. I have 2 Yoruba children. They only paid 5,000 naira as bride price. So we have a right to demand more money anytime. She was richer, dying out of hunger at a particular point. But thank God, we survived. You see, when my father died at 40, he was a politician and also a principal, but he didn't have much money. In those days, you had to keep your day job, even if you were a member of the House of Representatives. Yes, my mother, an Anambra woman, was a trader. Put your hands together for Anambra women. Who died in my arms. Yes, my mother, an Anambra woman, was a trader. Put your hands together for Anambra women. She was richer than my dad, so my dad would borrow money from her to buy the land. and he never paid back. You know how it is. And my mother dared not raise the subject again. At the end of the war, I could not go back to Port Harcourt. My home was abandoned property. Those of you who come from Port Harcourt know the story. The home that a widow, my father had just laid the foundation when he died in a motor car accident, on duty. The building that a widow, and living just adjacent to us, the Eco-Foods on Hospital Road, we could see you, we could relate. In fact, I thought we were related because every family in Port Harcourt was together. You didn't care where they came from or who they were. Once you're from Port Harcourt, every parent had the right to reprimand another child that you saw misbehaving. It was a beautiful town, but we couldn't get back to it. So for me, the Civil War never ended. At the end of that war, my father, oh no, it never ended. Still going on. I had no family house. My poor mother went back to claim the property she was fitting into a coal mine by people whom she had helped all her life and sent to school because she's an Igbo woman and now Port Harcourt belonged to another group of people. They forgot the sacrifices that the Igbos made. It's still going on. No apology has ever been made about that. The road that is now referred to Harold Wilson Drive used to be DK Owenu Road because of the sacrifice that people like the Owenos, the Eco-Foods, you know them, the sacrifices they made in the building of the Harcourt. Here I am. So I traveled outside thanks to my sister who was at Harvard at the time, who organized for the rest of us to come and go to school. But it's a great privilege.
Well, that was Onyeka Onwenu expressing her anger with the Nigerian state on how Igbos were treated over their abandoned properties. But we have continued to, if she belonged to another generation, there is a generation that is equally very angry. And I have cropped some of the conversation on this to show you how this is going to go on to the next generation if the abandoned property question is not addressed and settled. But the question is, how do you settle a problem that has taken on a life of its own? Even the generation that was not there, that was not directly affected, is angry. And I have taken the liberty to crop the conversation between Olayoku Ademola and some of his colleagues on the West African Transnational Justice Facebook. Ogadima Arisuku wrote, I am a second generation all victim of abandoned property. My father lost his house in Port Harcourt. I feel bitter when my uncles talk about it. And my question is, how many generations will feel the same way Ogadima felt about this issue? When will this matter be laid to rest? Then Philip answered him, we need to explore these narratives to heal. And that interested me because about 10 years ago, I had explored this narrative when I was supervising a PhD student who was writing on the Civil War, but whose father had left Ibadan at the height of the Civil War and whose property was returned to him by his neighbor who took care of the property and paid all the rents to him. And so that became significant for me. And so to look at this in other lands became a kind of historic duty. But after Olayoku's response, a more acerbic response came from Itua. And as far as Itua was concerned, who needs healing? Is it the one who have died, their children who are witnessing monumental injustices, and draw inspiration from the heroes of the past? Is it the citizens of the fragile state who live precariously? I'd like to be a part of this convo. Thanks for presenting the opportunity. I hope he's around now. I hope he's listening. And then a guy from the southwestern part of Nigeria also weighed in. Mr. Taiwo Bangboshe said, this workshop should try as much as possible to explore ways for genuine reconciliation and integration of Igbos and other minorities into the mainstream of Nigeria's political economic system. Say, Mr. Bangboshe's good intentions for Nigeria and Nigerians, but trying to reconcile, trying to create Nigerians will take much more than this presentation or any workshop for peace to reign. This is because, as I've said, this issue has developed a life of its own in which each group was trying to justify its own position. But historians have also weighed in on argument to look at the issues. And I'm going to show you some of the perspectives that also arose. And so, how did this issue begin? After the outbreak of the Civil War, many people of Igbo origin sold their landed properties at giveaway prices, and many who could not or who were unwilling to dispose theirs left them behind. And so, even before the war ended, some administrators had set up abandoned properties committee to register and supervise these properties. In states like most northern states, rents were collected and these properties returned to rightful owners after the Civil War. So it was not totally bad news for the Igbos because yes, the nation was at war, but some other parts of the country also knew what had to be done and they did it. The then Western region had no policy on abandoned properties. The Igbo owners of many properties came back after the Civil War to reclaim their properties without problems. Well, apart from the southeastern states, now cross rivers and rivers, and even within the eastern state itself, there was no problem with the abandoned properties after the Civil War. Surprisingly, within the east itself, the issue came up, even beyond what happened in the southeastern state. What then are the issues involved in these states? Let us look at why this became very problematic in Port Harcourt, especially. Port Harcourt was established in 1913. That was when the British bought parcels of land from the Ikwere to construct what the British envisaged would become a model township. A model township where nobody wants to know who came from where. And that actually happened because, in reference to what Onyeka Owenu said, nobody wanted to know where anybody came from. But history has a very long shadow. Land ownership has a very long shadow. Ethnicity has a very long shadow. And that was filed away for future references. Because by the 1950s, the city had not only become cosmopolitan with people from different parts of the country, with Lebanese, with Indians, with the British, also reside in that city. By 1963, the Igbo population had outstripped all the other population in the city. And that was the beginning of the problem. The politicization of ethnicity. And don't forget that the Ikwere, because today you can also listen to Ikwere say, oh, we are Igbos, we are not Igbos. So when the city was bought from them, they still have this psychological sense of ownership. But the same with other groups, even within Port Harcourt, who were ousted by the new model township. And there were also others who saw the rivers or the Port Harcourt region as their own, irrespective of who migrated into the place and when. So let's take excerpts from Abolade Adeniji's work to showcase what actually happened and why the issue of abandoned houses has become extremely very difficult. by 1949, the Igbos had started winning town council elections in that city because of the advantage of population. And Onyeka Onwenu mentioned it. Her father was one of those elected. Then the discovery of oil in and around Port Harcourt in the mid-1950s brought in more Igbos into that region. And so the population of Igbos began to balloon. And then it also became a political issue because the NCNC also weighed in on the part of the people on ground. You know, the stand of the NCNC at the 1958 Wheeling Commission of Inquiry into Minority Affairs was demonstrative of the fact that it was not willing to concede the right of self-determination to Rivers minorities. Rivers minorities had started, seeing the trend and how the population of Igbos had started ballooning in Port Harcourt. And to add to this, the Igbo State Union also weighed in on this. And so, between 1957 and 1959, the question of Port Harcourt had become a very strong question in the political economy. In short, the way things were going, the creation of Rivers State that the minorities of Rivers agitated for was more or less blocked by Igbo, who were interested in maintaining their economic interest in the area. And so that takes us to the tiny narratives coming from elsewhere. We have also listened to the voices of the so-called indigenous owners of Port Harcourt and Rivers generally. We have not heard their voices, and I am not aware of any work that has been able to articulate in a strong way what they also were feeling. But some of the things I got included: one, some people of Cross Rivers also suffered the same fate in the abandoned property saga. So it's not an Igbo issue alone. And then it is obvious that a Igbo gained ascendance into Igbocha. The person I interviewed, that's what he told me. Igbocha, the original name of Port Harcourt, through the leadership role they played as the dominant ethnic group during the days of the regional government with Enugu as capital. Then with the coming of the colonial rails, Igbos also followed rail into Port Harcourt. And so the dominance of Port Harcourt by the Igbos was assured. And one of the things raised, one of the issues raised, was that streets in the city were named at the discretion of the Igbos. That also rankled a little bit. And if you also listen to Onyeka Onwenu, she also mentioned it, that original names were Igbo names and they are now being changed. So what you are witnessing in this was a kind of quiet anger that was brewing and that would come out later. But if we then look at the Civil War and the abandoned property saga, the Igbos who fought and lost the war were assured by the federal government that there was going to be no punishment for anybody. And that was why the federal government declared no victor, no vanquished. But in the light of these developments, was it a genuine act of benevolence or mere pious proclamation? Most especially when we also had the 3 R's, reconstruction, reintegration, rehabilitation, as part of the doctrine of no victor, no vanquished. So what happened? Let us quickly look at the Afra's Act of Surrender and how this would ultimately also affect how the Igbos were treated in the scheme of things. When Philip Effiong declared I give you not only my own personal assurances and colleagues and of the entire former Biafran people of our fullest cooperation and very sincere best wishes for the future. A tone had already been set to say, well, we are okay with whatever we negotiate in future. And since he had also proclaimed, we are loyal Nigerian citizens and accept the authority of Federal Military Government of Nigeria, of course, that also strengthened the hands of the federal government. He equally went on that we accept the existing administrative and political structure of the Federation of Nigeria, and that any future constitutional arrangement will be worked out by representatives of the people of Nigeria. That the Republic of Biafra hereby ceases to exist. On the one hand, the federal government made what has turned out to be a pious proclamation. On the other hand, and with benefit of hindsight, the Biafrans also made what has now amounted to a mere pious proclamation. Because from what we are seeing, from both sides, not only did the doctrine of no victor, no vanquished become unworkable, the surrender by the Republic of Biafra that ceased to exist on January 14, 1970, also appeared also not realistic, because what we are seeing today has shown that Biafra, or the spirit behind it, is well and alive. And so it became obvious that the reintegration agenda was not carefully attained to attain any progressive goals. And we are going to see this. And the abandoned property question has provoked Igbo resentment. Well, there are those who are not involved, but of course the power of narration has also brought everybody into the fold to look at how Nigeria has continued to marginalize some groups in this country. Since then, some Nigerians have been arguing that it is improper to talk about national integration when the abandoned property question remains unresolved. So the question is, how are we going to resolve this abandoned property issue when some groups on ground are claiming that, well, we are the owners of the land? Committees had been set up to look at the issues. A decree had been brought into existence to oust the jurisdiction of courts in this regard. Others have even contended that the abandoned property problem is an indication that the civil war has not ended. And so, is the civil war going to end? When is the abandoned property case going to be totally and absolutely resolved? And we are going to see how the federal government handled this issue and how Chief Sam Mbakwe also began to engage the federal government on how the issue was handled. And so between law and justice, to have law does not mean having justice. And that happened in the case of the abandoned properties. After the war, owners of the abandoned properties did not find it easy getting back their properties. And we know how red tape works in this area. There were bottlenecks, both legal and otherwise, put on the part of the owners of the property. For those whose leases had expired, number one, they had difficulties in renewing them. Some of them were not even renewed at all. In other cases, the government did not take proper account of the abandoned properties, and we are going to see that later. you know. And so, how did the government do this? It did it under the SPIF by categorizing this property into 4 classes. 1, those whose legal ownership were established beyond all reasonable doubt. So it's not true that some people were not giving back their properties. Some people were giving back because they had title deeds, they had papers, and so their legal ownership were established and they got back their property. 2, for those which the original owners could not provide documents to establish lawful ownership, their properties were put into what was called the distributable pool. He said, no, we are not saying we're not going to give you back your property, but let's see some documents. And that was difficult for some people. Then 3, some properties whose ownership were lawfully established, but were acquired and put in the distributable pool by government. Yes, we have seen your papers. Yes, we have established your ownership, but the government needs your property. How this was determined is another story entirely. And that in itself is what historians should work on. How were such properties acquired and put into the distributable pool in spite of the fact that genuine ownership had been established? And so that's why it's going to take a long time for this issue to be settled. And 4, those whose ownership were established, but which were compulsorily acquired for public purposes. Well, historians should also go after the properties and let us see the public purposes for which these properties were compulsorily, forcefully acquired. So within these 4 points, apart from number 1, there was room for anger and bitterness. And then, of course, this went on for a long time, and the federal government had to intervene in the issue. It set up the Colonel Daramola panel under the Muliri Rita Allah Muhammad administration to look into abandoned properties issues. And the mandate was to look into the operation of finances abandoned property ties authorities established in the whole of Eastern states since inception till date, and that was in 1976. Inquire into the ownership and the mode of disposal. That is very significant. The mode of disposal of each property, and determine the justification of fairness of such exercise. That is where the problem is going to come from, the justification and fairness of the disposal. Because as we are going to see, there appear to be a play with figures in the distribution, and that the committee should make appropriate recommendations on the aforementioned issues. Well, at the end of the exercise, the panel found abandoned properties authorities of East Central States, Shodi, even in the Igbo heartland itself, but commended that of Southeastern States. So not all that took place, even within the East, was above board. But there were already questions, doubts cast on the one in the Southeastern States, even though the committee commended the abandoned properties authorities. And so the Daramola panel recommended the payment of 500 naira to each previous owner, regardless of the size of property, as rent arrears that accrued during the period 1970 to 1976. Obviously, this was an act of injustice to many people to say, look, 500 naira from 70 to 76. And as we are going to see later, people began to agitate against this. You know, owners of structures demolished at the instance of government agents were also to be appropriately compensated. Who determines the appropriateness of this? So the white paper on the panel's report directed that 75% of the houses in Port Harcourt should be sold to indigenes of River State. And so the question now is, how do you establish the indigenes? As far as Oyeka Onwenu was concerned, as far as several others were concerned, they had become indigenes of River State. You know, and so 10% of the property should be sold to other Nigerians, excluding the Igbos. How that decision was arrived is also very fascinating. And so, yes, a few of them got back the properties. 75% of the houses should be sold to indigenes of rivers, and then 10% sold to other Nigerians, excluding the Igbos. So there was a kind of exclusion of the Igbos in this case. And so the federal government went on to adhere this. And of course, there were litigations following this. Chief Mbakwe went to court because the 75% allocation of the abandoned property to rivers indigenes did not reflect the disposition of the of Colonel Daramola committee to it. And so he showed visible anger over the way the Igbo were treated in this case. And we have continued to see this manifest. Secondly, he also regarded the 500 naira paid out by the Abandoned Properties Committee to the claimants as paltry sum, since it meant that even a 3 or 4 story building attracted a 500 naira rent for a period of 6 years. It's still a continuation of the 20 pounds given to those who survived the war, irrespective of any amount they had in the bank. And so Mbakwe regarded the whole exercise as a national conspiracy to make the Igbo pay a war levy or reparation for the loss of the war. And so that was the narrative that went into town. And so up till today, that is the prevailing narrative over the abandoned property. Well, government did not actually stop at that. The Daramala panel was followed by the setting up of the Abandoned Property Implementation Committee headed by Major David Mack, the same David Mack. And there were dark insinuations years after about how David Mack handled the issue, but that is not before us. But the task of the committee was to implement the recommendation of the Colonel Daramala panel. And this is where major problems also arose. After the completion of its task, it submitted a report on September 18, 1979 to the federal government. And it claimed to have disbursed 3.6 million as rent arrears in River State and 1.5 million in Cross River State. The MAC committee also claimed that out of the 2,000 houses in River State, 1,323 were disposed of, while 517 out of 700 were disposed of in Cross River State. But according to a research carried out by C.C. Undu in the Political Economy of Abandoned Property and quoted by Newswatch magazine, Undu claimed that rather than the figure claimed by Mack, that 2,000 houses were abandoned, Undu claimed that the total number from his investigation were 5,960. And out of this, 2,539 of these were original owners, while 1,790 were acquired by the government. Another 977 were offered for sale by Mack's implementation committee, and 654 houses were claimed to be without owners. Because of the opaque nature of all this, answers to some of the questions raised by these issues are still blowing in the wind. And so, whose figure was right? Who were those who got the properties back? Was it true that 54 houses were without owners? So these are issues that will continue to generate bad blood for years. And so Chief Mbakwe also weighed in on the problem. Number one, how many houses did Mark sell? And you know, the federal government could not be questioned in some of these. How many have been sold and what happened to those not sold? Have the owners of the sold properties received their money and what did they receive? How much of the 14 million naira voted by the federal government as payment of token arrears was actually used? Who and who got the arrears and who received the token rents? How many houses did the federal government receive for its own use? How many did the River State government acquire for its own use? By the nature of things, we know how things like this work in Nigeria. I have no evidence to support a position, but future research will still need to unravel all this. So despite the unsatisfactory answers of the Abandoned Property Implementation Committee to the above barrage of questions, the Obasanjo administration not only identified with the Abandoned Property Implementation Committee members, it also went ahead to making their decisions unchallengeable in court by Decree 90 of 1979. And according to a conclusion, it thus became clear that a just resolution of the case was impossible. So by 1979, it was obvious that it was a question that will continue to reverberate over the time. And so I also support Barrister Charles Ugwayi's position in this respect, because it is a battle that will continue to rage. It is a question that will continue to reverberate. And so, because of the complexity of the issues surrounding abandoned property, he wrote, and I quote, "The battle is not over because the sins that led to the Civil War are still with us. These are sins of impunity, indiscipline, injustice, and bad governance. But this speaks not only to what the Igbos are suffering, it speaks to what every ethnic group is suffering in the country. And so it might not be easy to locate Barrister Gwanyi's position as speaking directly to the resolution of the injustices suffered by the Igbo. And one of the reasons why this might not be easy is because in this country, the doctrine that rules is winner takes all.
There is too much history behind this ethnic identities that is now ruling the country. I'm not sure we are ready for that yet, simply because Nigerian leadership process has been win too much on the winner takes all syndrome. And so when you have this winner takes all syndrome, the jostling for advantages becomes our Achilles heel. And that is why the search for advantage is not based on individual positions, but largely on ethnic criteria. It is our turn. And for as long as it is our turn to the exclusion of others, then of course we are not going to achieve that kind of national identity you are talking about. In a place like the United States, you feel, oh, a person like Obama, who is black, would not have become president if America had not created that kind of inclusionary approach to human progress. In our own case, we have not, because we see ourselves too much as Igbos, Hausas, Yorubas, and those who laws have not helped matters. They have continued to also hone their skills to be able to also take advantage of their identity. So the next group of people, we have seen the capacity of those who are in government or power to arrogate things to themselves or to their groups, and that has created bad blood in the country. And so other groups are now waiting in the wings to also do the same thing, because it's their turn. So so for how long are we going to then rotate it, and it's everybody's turn, and then the country gets tired? So how soon do we begin to create that sense of nationhood in everyone, where, we no longer care about where the president comes from, but about progress? So this is part of the issues we have to deal with. And the way to deal with it is to look at our educational curriculum and then begin to teach our compatriots what it means to be humans, what it means to be global citizens, and most important of all, what it means to be Nigerians. We will get more out of being Nigerians than being members of our ethnic groups.
Well, I have been taking up on that last bit, talking about getting more out of being Nigerians, because as I'm going to come to it quickly, we are not healing. We are not healing. And so let us return to Itua Peter's poster, who needs healing? And I would say every Nigerian needs healing. We are all miserable and disillusioned. It is a crisis of self-immolation. As we say in indigenous cosmologies, Nigeria has become a country where both the lion and the chicken standing on it are both uncomfortable. So what is Onyeka Onwuenu's reaction to this conundrum? Because we still have to go back to see, and I will soon finish. We still have to go back to Onyeka Onwuenu's position, which is also like everybody's position now.
Our neighbors.
No?
You insult us, and sometimes we do the insulting as well, and that's terrible. We've come to a stage where we have to be insulting each other so badly. But go ahead. We will not succumb. We will not bow. We are children of God. We are here for a purpose. God has put us on this good earth for that purpose. You cannot drive us to the sea. You cannot tell us to shut up and take the pain that you are inflicting on us, abuse us on top of it. Listen, if you don't want us, then let us go. Thank you very much.
Well, if you don't want us, let us go. But isn't that the language of everybody in this country now? It has moved out of the mouth of the Igbos into everybody's mouth to say, look, let's go. So in building a nation, several things have to come into play. The issue of abandoned properties must be reframed within the context of our national aspirations. And it's not being resolved because there are no national aspirations to speak of. In this country, we tend to localize problems and put our people in a bind at every twist and turn. Oh, June 12th was West's problem. Banditry was the North's problem. Abandoned properties was the East problem. So that's their own problem. There is no context of national identity, national aspiration. So for us, the problem should be viewed in the context of a national frame. When is that national frame going to develop? You know, frame as a problem in the East or South, and not as a problem of the people of the East. And so what is the ideology of the Nigerian state in this regard? There is none. The only way we can resolve all these issues, all these problems, is by developing what I have called a national grand strategy. And I have always told those I teach the national grand strategy too, to say national grand strategy is not policy. It is not Vision 2020. It is different. It is something that takes you towards your national interests. These are the wide interests of the people of a nation. In this country today, the country is split down the middle between leavers and stayers. No, we want to leave. Oh, no, you can't leave because we are staying. And because we are staying, you can't leave. And that's an answer to Onyeka Onwenu. Because we are staying, you can't leave. And this is a conundrum. So one of the original signal characteristics of our national thinking in this country, if we can't go, because we are all in a loveless marriage, if we can't go, then let's begin to develop a national grand strategy. Grand strategy is the art of reconciling ends and means. It refers to the collection of plans and policies that comprise the state's deliberate efforts to harness political, economic, cultural, and diplomatic tools together to advance a nation's national interest. We are not doing that. There is no national grand strategy in this country. Forget Vision 2020, forget all the visions. There is no national grand strategy because this involves purposive action, and we are not seeing that. So this will be a useful concept for coordinating the nation's resources towards attaining our existentialist objectives of unity, faith, peace, and progress. So without a national grand strategy, running after unity, faith, peace, and progress is an illusion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Adeshina, for this wonderful talk. So we already have questions that have come via the question and answer. So I have two questions here. I also have a request for comments. How would you prefer to move forward?
Is it, you want to read out the questions?
Sure.
Okay. Then we can take some from the floor.
Sure, I'll read a few of them together. So the first one that came in, and we have about half an hour for the question and answer session. So the first question that came in is, my name is Zoe Ejiofor. I'm an Igbo from Asaba, but grew up in the UK. And they wanted to ask, what do you think is the best way for Nigerians to learn about the Biafran War? Do you think it should be taught in schools? They've been thinking about this, but thought it might be too controversial. I believe it should be taught in schools at an early age and spin it to show that we should try to stay together and learn more about each other's grievances to see how we can work through them together. This question was posed a bit before your conclusion, which I think addresses some of this. The second question we have is, we have quite a few now. So what is the state of abandoned property in the northern part of Nigeria? Did Igbo people also suffer the same fate as they did in Rivers State? We have Oluruntoyin Falola, a request to make comments. They need to go. Is it possible to field that quickly?
Yes. Yes,
okay.
please.
And then we'll continue, kind of group some of the questions together. So we'll take the comments. Are you able to unmute yourself? No, okay. Let me ask Philip to do that. So while we do that, okay. So while we do that, I will continue with the questions. And once you're able to unmute yourself, you're welcome to kind of jump in. Okay. Would you like to address, I guess, the first two before we field the rest?
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you, Zoe, for your questions. What is the best way to teach the history of the Civil War in Nigeria? Well, we have been teaching it to the university students, but I'm not sure we have attended to it in the primary schools. And I think looking at the curriculum, some of these things should be known quite early and with reference to those factors that bind us together rather than the things that separate us. There are different ways to teach history. History is not only about facts and figures, it's also about opinions. And so you may get at the end of the day, the diversity of opinion in the West, in the North, in the East, about the causes of the Nigerian Civil War, the trajectory, the consequences, and the outcome. And so how do you sanitize? How do you sanitize this? And it is also not good to teach sanitized history to these children. They should be allowed to know the barest facts. And that's why I said so in the clip I showed about my interview with the newspaper, that there is too much history behind the ethnicities in this country. The other, how you narrate history surrounding the other is also colored by certain prejudices. And because of this, it's going to be difficult. But I'm sure the Historical Society of Nigeria is already working on how to bring out a curriculum that will help us to understand the way to attend to this problem. So it's difficult now, but I'm sure we'll get there. Then on the state of abandoned properties in northern Nigeria, well, it has not become an issue. And so because it has not become an issue, there is the tendency to also assume that it didn't become a problem. Why is it that it was the issue of Port Harcourt that became very problematic? I'm sure, like in the West, where neighbors helped people to also monitor and manage their properties, the same thing also happened in the North. But the issue of abandoned properties also never became an issue in the North.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I enjoyed the lecture. And let me congratulate one of the members here who's turning 60, Professor Yeweso. Congratulations on your birthday. God will give you more life, blessings, and prosperity. So the takeaway from this lecture is a lot. I don't want to comment on the lecture itself, but on the takeaway. And the first takeaway is that this organization and others must focus on signals and warnings that many of these things have unresolvable consequences. If you are Yoruba in Kano and you are fighting, they have consequences. Igbo in Lagos, they have serious consequences. So that political leaders and those representing their people, when they engage in rhetorics and move towards conflict, they must know that there are permanent consequences. I've always seen these consequences before so many times. Hutu and Tutsi, the same thing is ongoing. So for those advising the government and organizations like this, they must also be very cautionary. If you want to fight, you can initiate a fight, but you don't know the end. You can begin any conflict, but you can never determine its consequences when they unleash. The second point is sometimes when we take a historic topic like this, we tend to particularize it when indeed it is universal. I doubt there's any country you will go that you are not going to see equivalencies of this. I'm in Texas. The city named Austin, 3 hours away, Houston. These are names of generals who drove away Mexicans. This land I'm sitting on belongs to Mexicans. They drove them away. After the American Civil War, Washington, D.C. took the size of Texas and California, purchased it, and distributed it to white families. So we have to also put some of these topics in the larger context and their consequences. When the Zionist movement wanted Israel back, they gave them Kenya. They refused. People tend to forget that. The Zionists said they don't want Kenya. They want Palestinian, and they claim it. Remember, those who went back, they constructed the narrative as if they were the ones who were driven out of Israel. They were not. They were not. In fact, some have argued that they were not even related. So these consequences is a takeaway. Hutu Tutsi, they're managing that as we speak. It's even much bigger. That if you unleash some issues. The second one with respect to Biafra, which you see in all the issues, is about the narrative. So it's a very peculiar narrative that in the entire northern region, they don't talk about the war. You're not going to find 3 books written about northerners and Biafra. They don't even, that silence, people should pay attention to it. If you're fighting someone and that person is quiet, it says a lot. It says a lot. So the Biafran narrative is very powerful and is also very unusual in world history. Because in world history, it is the person who wins a war that constructs the narrative and talks more about it. In the Nigerian case, it's the other way around. And in that other way around, that narrative is not democratic, it's not free. Because your opinion, for instance, as a distinguished professor spoke, is not represented in the lecture. Why? Because they keep quiet. They don't say anything. They say, okay, we've taken our land back, we've taken the houses back. So they don't give us their own narrative, which is also a very dangerous way in managing any state. If the Ijaw refuses to talk about Port Harcourt, so where is the balance in the narrative? Because they don't say anything. They just keep quiet. And that danger has to be represented. And one final point, the Nigerian case is not just peculiar to this Port Harcourt. It's just because there's no hegemonic ethnicity controlling the place. People talk about China. There's an hegemonic ethnicity in China. The Chinese say you can be a Muslim, but you'll be in trouble. You can have a church, but the cross of your church should not be higher than the Chinese flag, in which they will raise down the church. It's gone. So in which that hegemonic ethnicity is saying, this is what I want. Or if you go to India, what you call Indian constitution is about Hindu cultures and Hindu nationalism that they have infused into the definition of that nation. So in the Nigerian case, that hegemony, Sadano tried it over the Middle East, it didn't work. So as long as you don't have this dominant ethnicity governing the space of 250 groups, this problem has nowhere to go, unfortunately. But what we can do, what is possible, is to say we're not going to kill one another. We will warn those who want war at any time that these have serious consequences. Because if you are Yoruba people in Kano and you fight, don't come back and say your house is waiting for you. Your house is not waiting for you because another person will take it over. And once the person takes it over, it's not going to let you get it again. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to be a member of your team. I'm very grateful. And I have to run. I'm taking my vaccination, my first vaccination today. Yes, ma'am.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Thank you, Professor Fellows.
Thank you very much, sir.
So we have a whole range of comments additionally in the chat, and I will save those so that you can read them to the full extent later. I'll add on, another question from the comments, and then you can also respond to Professor Fellows' comments if you'd like. So there's another question in the comments about kind of the politics of portraying this history and this idea of kind of Igbo dominance that can emerge during these historical retracings. And so questions about victim blaming and echoing ethnic stereotypes that perhaps can generate more anger. So the question in the chat is, what accounted for the imagination and treatment of Igbo people in Port Harcourt as aliens, kind of historically? And shouldn't residents of a place all have privileges due to them as citizen residents of the place? In Lagos, too, similar experiences are rife. People continue to be treated as foreigners in their own country based on the idea of ethnic ownership of places that are supposed to be cosmopolitan centers. So that's another question to add in the mix. There's a few other general themes that are emerging as well that are more forward-facing as well. But why don't we take that question as well as perhaps if you wanted to respond to Professor Fellows' comments as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, let me also respond to Professor Fellows' very good comments. Yes, I agree with his position that we should be able to draw parallels with other issues, with issues similar to this in other countries, and that will help us to learn lessons from other experiences. But basically, in the case of the North, the silences emanating from the North, as well as the silences emanating from the Ijaws, both represent a tendency. And that is the tendency of victory. When you have won the case, why are you shouting? Why are you talking? So as far as the North was concerned, they were victorious in battle. And so why do you want to reopen that case or that you won? The same thing with the Ijaws or the owners of rivers. Nobody has come out to say, well, I am one of those who benefited from the properties distributed. And this is because at times, you also have to go back to the cosmologies guiding all this. If you are going to claim land ownership, in several instances, what determines indigeneity is the burial mound of your great-grandfathers. If you are not able to say, here was the burial mound of my great-grandfather or my ancestors, then that becomes a problem, even with modernity. And that affected what happened in Lagos, where Igbo co-ownership of Lagos was challenged by the Oba of Lagos and several others. There is a clear dichotomy between traditional cosmologies and modernity. We are modern, or so we claim, but we are also being ruled by our indigenous cosmologies. So it is going to be very difficult. Well, it's going to take a long time for that kind of national identity to emerge because there are several issues that must be resolved first. You know, the issue of dominance, the issue of mutual suspicion, the issue of mutual dislike, the issue of mutual insolence. All these are things that must be resolved before that kind of mutual ownership can emerge. And so it will take some time for that question to be resolved. And then, of course, in the case of Igbo as aliens, based on ethnic identities, well, it's not only Igbos that suffer from that kind of orientation. Other ethnic groups also suffered from that orientation, even in the Igbo heartland, where in some cases they don't even sell land to you. So it's not restricted to either Port Harcourt or the North or Yoruba land. It's everywhere. And so before you cast that stone, you also have to look inwards to say, what are we doing? In what ways have we settled this kind of question on our land? And so land is, according to Malinowski, you live on it, you live by it, and you live for it. It is something that is constant. So people can die for their land. And that is an issue that not even intervention by governments have been able to resolve this issue. Yes, now the government is the owner of all land, but ask the government. The government itself cannot approach some land because of the incendiary nature of the attachment to such land. So it's something that is going to be resolved in the future, but I don't see it happening in a few years from now.
Okay, so we have, I see one, let me see if I can unmute you. We also have, are you able to unmute yourself? I see one hand. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I have just little intervention to make. That the abandoned property question is not an Igbo question. It used to be an Igbo question, but that matter was authoritatively resolved and legally too when Ojukwu Trading Company, which the father of Dim Odumejuku owned, Sir Philip Louis Odumejuku. The properties were located at Oxford Street, Ikoyi, and a number of other properties in Lagos. In the local classicals, the court ruled that a property that rightly belonged to its owner can never be abandoned. So, Dim Ikedirama Ojukwu recovered all the properties belonging to the family from the Lagos state government and the federal government. So we urge all people, all claimants to such cases to look at judicial precedent, and if they have rightful claims to such property, to please approach the court. Secondly, the abandoned property question is part of the larger Nigerian question. And we must also see it that way, that in every community in Nigeria today, there are crises of that nature. If you cannot produce the original deed or the property, how you acquired that land, how that land belonged to you in the traditional domain and in the current domain, that property may not be yours. I can cite a case in Osun State where a powerful politician, the wife of a powerful politician, appropriated land belonging to another family. And that case lasted from about 1959 till quite recently. when the supposed landlord was asked to remove his property from the land which did not belong to her. It's a well-known case. I don't want to mention the name of the family because it's a well-known family in Osun State and Nigerian politics.
Right.
The Nigerian Civil War and its aftermath remain the most civil in the history of Nigerian Civil War. After the American Civil War, the South was under occupation, military occupation, for the next 10 years. And Thaddeus Stephen, the leader of the rebel army, was still waving the bloody t-shirt. The American Civil War has not ended till date. And that is what we saw recently, the Capitol uprising. Nation building is a continuous process, and we must all unite to allow nation building to continue. We all remember history differently, Chimanda, but there is a history that connects all of us. Chino Achebe acknowledged that the Nigerian Civil War gave the Nigerian nation the recipe to extract pound of flesh from the Igbo. But Gowon, the consummate war general, did not allow that. We all remember the Abagana disaster. And we remember all those people who fought the war and lost their lives. The Sudanese Civil War, the Ayaya Rebellion, Congolese Civil War. We know that 10 years, less than 10 years after 1970, an Igbo man, one of the cerebral architects at Nigeria, emerged, Alex Epime, as the vice president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Take a study of civil wars in history, where the vanquished was able to emerge at the apex leadership of the Nigerian nation. Let us build. Odumegwu Ojukwu did not die Biafra. He died a Nigerian. I was given a national burial. The abandoned property is part of the larger national question. Let us unite and shake across the Niger to build a brighter future for Nigeria. We do not have any other country. Ghana cannot contain us. Equatorial Guinea, Mauritania, Guinea-Bissau, all these countries surrounding us. Nigeria must find its own solution to the Nigerian problem. You can see the American problem.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for these comments. I think they highlight very much the kind of ongoing comparative perspective and also ongoing kind of unfinished, unresolved questions that we are definitely centering today. So we have just a few minutes left. There's one kind of last question just that is remaining from the chat, just a more general question about how do we manage recent ethnic tensions gradually swallowing the Nigerian state as a matter of avoiding history repeating itself. I think this theme obviously has come up in all the comments. I know there was a question that Professor Strong wanted to ask about reparations and justice, but perhaps these are things, I'll give you just a few minutes, Professor Adeshina, just to leave us with any final thoughts before we wrap up in about 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I thank everybody who has asked one question or the other or made a comment. But in retrospect, looking at the kind of tension that has engulfed the Nigerian state, we can link it with each group focusing on its own grievances and not seeing the problems within a national prison. And I gave the example of, what is happening in the East is the problem of the East, rather than a problem of Nigeria affecting the Easterners. There is a difference between the two. And so right now we are all focused too much on our grievances. And so nobody is asking the right questions. Nobody is looking for the right answers. Like I said, we have too many stayers and too many leavers. Too many people want to leave the union, the federation, but many people also want to stay. So it's like there is a kind of balance of terror on ground. And so there is the likelihood that the next group to declare secession will be used as the point of contact for the others to unite. So it's like we are in this together. Yeah, the agitation has been more in the eastern part of the country with Biafra. Recently, the agitations for Oduduwa Republic in the West is also sounding louder. But I don't, like I said in my clip, I don't see all this as ways out of this problem, unless you want to create another Rwanda, Burundi in this part of the world. So in my conclusion, I gave a way out. Let's develop a grand strategy that will help all of us to understand who we are, what we are bringing to the table, how we are going to jointly solve all these problems. That for me is the way out. But if you insist on leaving, then like Professor Falola said, you have to think about the consequences. Thank you very much.
Okay, do I go now? Just for the final comment. So, on behalf of the YJ Center family, I would like to thank our guest lecturer, Professor Lukai Additional, who is always helping us in most supportive role. He is also one of people that are affiliated with the organization and has been supporting us since the start of the organization. We appreciate you and we thank you for the very wonderful lecture. I thank my very good friend, Dr. Lu. It's good to see your face once again, and thanks for the wonderful experience. We thank everybody that participated, for the civil way in which we were able to engage this discussion that could go, very emotional at times. And just to say, like Prof said in his introduction, this is just the beginning of the conversation. And so we cannot heal or we cannot end this conversation just with one lecture. And that is one of the foci of the center, to bring these conversations and keep engaging until perhaps we're able to move gradually forward as a nation. So we thank everybody for participating, and we encourage you to follow our social media website. Our events are coming up in subsequent months. We usually have one monthly, so we'll be keeping us posted via our social media. And so thank you everyone for participating. God bless you.